Okay. Okay. So that's that. I think there's a lot of us here. So, um, I don't know. Let's try to just make sense of all of that. Uh, I'll start off by saying I really appreciate you being here. It's really great. There's for many of us in this room, I was thinking about it today. It's a little corny, but for me, you and Mike Manieri and David Friedman later on, like you didn't know it, but I had a relationship with you for years. Like I would talk to you, I transcribe your stuff. I spent the summer transcribing Chega. I would just go, "How the hell are you doing this?" I would like talk to you and sort things out, and it was really cool because you were there for a long time, and I bet you for in my 20s, I thought about you every day. I'd go practice, and just do things. And I imagine, I'm not unique in that. And I remember, I just remember the whole thing. I was poor and I was driving a pizza truck, and you were on Terry Gross. And then you came out, and I was like, and I was young and immature. Gary Burton's gay. Well, I have to tell my friends. And it was really interesting. So that's the thing. And Mike Manieri too. I think of both of you guys as kind of uh, uh, vibe gods or jazz gods. And I remember you first came on the site, and this guy named Mallet Man kept coming on Vibes Workshop every day, and I thought, oh, who is this guy? He's on every day, and I looked, and it was you, and I said to you, um, "Why can we change your name to Gary Burton?" You said, "No, I don't want people to know that I'm here." And I said, "You know how many people you'll inspire to go practice?" And then you were nice and you said, "Yes." And then we had I drove you to the airport one time and we had a great talk, which is helping me now about playing and getting older and watching things change and don't work as well and do all that. And I remember that talk a lot because my right hand doesn't work as well as my left hand, but it still works, and I have to figure out how to make it work and just hanging on as long as we can. So I appreciate you being here. I think we all do. And you know what? We'll just start. I have a question from Bengalese who begged me to ask you this, and then we can open it up to other
Sure.
people if you have questions. Um,
Mhm.
is in an interview some time ago, I recall you referring to yourself as a bit of a tune doctor, someone who might not write many original tunes but has a knack for improving or shaping other people's compositions. I'm curious, have you ever worked on a tune that you initially didn't feel strongly about, whether it was your own or someone else's? Maybe it didn't fully click for you at first, but it ended up becoming a big success, either commercially or as one of your personal favorites over time.
Uh, well, in terms of writing my own songs, which I don't put myself in the same class of my sort of coterie of composers who I've featured through the years, people like Chick Corea and uh, Steve Swallow, Carla Blake, Keith Jarrett, Makoto, and so on. Often it's people that have been in my band and wrote music for us while they were in my band. And but my general description of my composing is that I write a tune about every 5 years. Um, Early on, I was writing, 10 songs a year because I had a new band and we needed music and we were all writing as fast as we could push ourselves to do. But I don't enjoy the, I get impatient with composing. I mean, playing is spontaneous. You just do it in time. But composing is like a very slow motion form of playing, and it's you have to have a lot of patience to sit there for what might be hours getting 8 bars of something on a page. Um, so normally I will when I do write something I get an inspiration, some theme or harmony thing. Often it's something I hear go by and listening to records of somebody else's music, and I hear a chord progression or a melody phrase that sticks in my mind, and I keep thinking about it. And next thing I know, I'm kind of developing it in my mind, and next thing I know, I feel like ooh, that could make us, a good a section of a tune, and then I'm off to the races, and I can complete it as a tune. I envy the people who the master of it is was Chick,
Hmm.
who could write on demand. He actually understood his writing process so well that, and I'll tell you how he would go about it. For instance, we would come back from a tour, and he would have 4 weeks to get
Opa,
ready for his next record with his band.
não, deixa eu ver agora. Eu tô prestando atenção nisso.
Mute
Still hear me
yourself.
okay?
Yeah, people have to mute themselves.
Okay. Um, and he would have 4 weeks to write a record worth of songs. And he would say what he did was he would turn everything off, close himself into his living room where his piano is and his instruments, and then he starts writing, and he writes until he's exhausted. And said, and then gets up the next day from sleeping and immediately returns to it. But no phone calls, no visitors, no distractions, no leaving the house for something else. If he stays in the setting, in the mood, he can keep going kind of nonstop. And he says he writes a tune and he puts it aside. And he writes another tune
Oh my God.
and he puts it aside. And he said most of the time, tunes one and two he never used. So, but tune number three, it was really clicking. And he could go on writing then without stopping until he's got a whole album's worth of new tunes to, hand out at the next rehearsal of his band. And I watched him do that over the 40 some years we played together. And it always amazed me how quickly and how focused he could do this. But he understood how his mind worked, and knew what circumstances he needed to set up so that he could fall into that. Now, I got off the question, which was the tune doctoring business. In a lot of cases, like particularly with the songs that my own band members would bring to me, or songs that my friends would mail me, if it came from Chick or Keith or Carla, they were usually quite finished. I'd get a lead sheet, but everything would be, the tune would be finished, complete, no odd moments in them, and so on. On the other hand, sometimes the guys in the band, like maybe when Pat Metheny was in the band, or Steve Swallow or Julian Lodge, uh, I would be getting ready to do a new record, and I'd say, what are you working on lately? And they've got two or three new tunes, and some of them would be still sketchy, or they have a good first section and then kind of a not so successful next section. And there's one spot that seems awkward and so on. And we would sit down together, and I was good at helping them fine tune their songs. And probably about my most proud example of this was the music for Pat's first record, Bright Size Life, which we wrote together. Well, he wrote them, and I advised on how to fine tune them. All the songs on that record. And that he lived a few blocks away from me at that time, and I had a piano in the house, so he would come over, and we would spend 2 or 3 evenings a week going over his latest, tune projects and kind of correcting them and adding things. Or often tunes have a rough spot here or there where a harmony resolution doesn't quite feel comfortable, or maybe there's a meter thing feels off, and a little moving things around, or adding another melody phrase somewhere, uh, kind of completes, the picture.
Did you did
So
you,
go
oh,
ahead.
did you change Bright Size Life at all?
I have no memory now whether I did or not. That was like 35 years ago.
Oh.
So I couldn't even tell you more than a couple of the names of the tunes that are on the record. I had to go look at the liner notes to remember what pieces are there. Um, but all those songs we worked on together um, till he thought he was ready to take them, to the recording sessions. And I was there for that as well.
Oh, you were at the session, and you were at the session, the Far East Suite, the Duke session. You were there too, right?
I was. That was. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Duke Ellington. One of his probably most respected records was called the Far East Suite.
Mhm.
Um, Came out in the 1960s. And I did a lot of concerts uh, with Duke Ellington, not playing with him, but on the same bill. We did almost an entire tour of playing the same festivals and concerts where my band and his band would be playing. The first time was I was still with Stan Getz, and he was on the same night, and he stopped to talk to me to tell me he really was impressed by how I was doing new things on the vibraphone. And he
Mhm.
said that he always liked it when somebody came up with new ways to play instruments. In fact, his whole band was made up of people who didn't play their instruments in conventional ways, which is why his group always sounded so unique because there were, instead of trying to get a blend of all the saxes sounding the same, he wanted five different sounding sax players that each had an individual voice. But anyway, he invited me to a record session. He We were both on RCA in those days, so um, I forget how we were together. It must have been at some gig or some press thing or something. But asked if I was going to be in town the next week, and I said yes. That'd be in New York City, and I said, "Would I, want to come down to? They were going to record next week. Would I like to come by?" I said, "Oh my God, that would be a thrill,
Mm.
exciting." So and they didn't start till like 10 at night, something. So the industrial buildings and office building, but it was deserted. And it was almost like, is anybody even here? But when I rounded the corner uh, of the studio, it was lined with limousines. And I thought, okay, this is definitely the place.
Mhm.
And walked in, there was the band. There were about 50 people sitting on folding chairs in the studio with the band, dressed in evening dresses and tuxedos, and so, like they were going to a ball of some kind. And inside the booth was also over capacity, full of people. They had spilled out into the studio and found chairs for everybody. So there was an audience of their friends that were there. And I watched them record for about 5 hours. And I didn't know what the music was. I knew it was new music that he had written, for this record. But not, until it came out, I didn't realize, that I had actually been there while it was going on. And it was, uh, even though I'd seen the band play at concerts quite a lot, seeing them recording was interesting because these were guys who had been playing together for 20, 30 years and knew each other, intimately, and teased each other and made jokes at each other, made fun of each other all the time. I mean, in one take, somebody was wrong, and Duke stopped and said, "Wait a minute, what's wrong there?" He said, and then somebody pointed out, said, "Oh no, that we're finished with that one. We're on the next tune now." He had been playing the wrong song. And said, "Well, nobody told me, that we had switched to a new song." Um, so that was just the way they operated. But I was thrilled that I got to be there and get a sample of, uh, again, a master at work. I'll say one more thing and then stop talking for a while. um, I feel really fortunate that just by coincidence of timing, my generation came along while the original jazz pioneers were still playing, still touring. still making records. Uh, Duke certainly, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, and maybe a dozen other legendary players from the who came up in the 30s and 40s and 50s and still playing in the 60s. So my generation, that's me and Chick and Herbie and Keith and so on, we got to know a lot of these people because of sharing the stage with them at festivals and sort of thing, and occasionally even collaborating with some of the old timers. And now we're the old generation, what's left of them of us still playing, and but I feel like I'm, I've been able to continue this connection to the originators of this music.
Mhm.
And my generation was the is from this point on, we won't have any direct, and I consider it a great honor and opportunity to have been around when these guys who made this up out of whole cloth. I mean, you look at Duke, what things that Duke Ellington was creating with his bands and his records back in those decades, and you think, where did he get these ideas from?
Mhm.
Because it wasn't as if he could listen to 10 other bands and and you know copy other people's stuff. He had to make it up in it from his own head, and that generation was doing that. It's really fascinating to me. Okay,
That was
that
great.
was a long answer. I'll keep them shorter.
That's great. So maybe if you have a question, maybe we should do the raised hand thing, which I forget where that's at, so we don't have a whole
Yeah,
bunch of
there's a
people.
hand.
There, right up.
Harvey,
Uh, oh, I see Paul Kaminsky.
Harvey Price. I see.
Oh, all right, Harvey, and then Paul.
Okay, I don't see Paul, but go ahead, Harvey. Turn your mic on.
Oh,
Yeah,
all right,
Here we go. Okay.
you got it.
Yep. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
yeah.
Great. Darius, this is a real treat. I'll, just say briefly, thank you for not only your contributions to the vibraphone, but to music in general. And I've been a huge fan for about 50 years. And I'm curious, this is a kind of specific. I'm curious in your time in Boston, if you ever came across Charlie Banakis. And
Yes, I did. I didn't know him well. Did
okay.
you? Did you study with
No,
him?
no, but I'm working with Gary Dial at this point, who's kind of his,
Oh, yeah. Well, Charlie was kind of most famous as a teacher in
right.
Boston. He was a local piano player, but he was revered highly by the many students that he taught privately. He didn't teach at Berkeley. There were a handful of teachers in the Boston area who were not at Berkeley, but that had, their own following of students, and he was kind of legendary. So
Right.
I don't even think I ever met him. I just knew him by reputation. People are always talking about Charlie this and Charlie that. Among a lot of Berkeley students took lessons with him,
Okay.
so his advice would often circulate among the students.
Cool. Okay. Thanks.
Sir,
Paul.
So, hi, Gary.
hi.
Um, how did your collaboration with Chick Corea come about?
Yeah, it was a unexpected turn of events. First of all, Chick and I knew each other, but 5 or 6 years before this happened, the duet thing happened, and he was actually in my band for 3 months during the summer of 1960. Was it 69? It would have been after Larry Coryell left my band. My rhythm section at that time was Roy Haynes and Steve Swallow, and I said to them, "Gee, Larry's leaving. Um, we need to. How should we replace him?" They both recommended that I seek out Chick, and I didn't. I only knew him casually. We had never played together, but I tracked him down. He was playing as Sarah Vaughan's accompanist at the time. So when I asked him if he wanted to join the band, he said, "Yeah, that would be great," because although he loved playing with Sarah, he didn't get to solo much with her, and so he was ready for a change. We played together maybe over 3 months. We did some jazz festivals and a couple of clubs, and then there was a 4 week break in the schedule, and we both felt that it wasn't really clicking, that we are playing, we kept feeling like we were getting in each other's way as a, you know, me as the vibes player, keyboard player, him as the piano player. And so we both agreed that as much as we thought it was going to be our dream band, it didn't seem to be working. So I went back to guitar, hired Jerry Hahn next, I believe. And about a week later, a chick called and said that Miles had just called him and that he was, excited he was going to join Miles's band, which was, huge step up in his career path. A few years went by, 1972 arrived, and we found ourselves playing a jazz festival in Munich. We weren't playing together. We were among musicians that were on that night. And the promoter of the concert, of the gig that night at the festival, had this idea that everybody should play a jam session tune at the end of the concert. And he went around asking different musicians, would they do this? And everybody said no, except for me and Chick, the two Americans that were on the show that night. So we quickly rehearsed one song that Chick had recently written, which was La Fiesta, which became one of our standards that we played over the years after that. So he taught it to me that afternoon at the sound check. And at the end of the concert, we came out and played this duet piece. The audience loved it. And I thought, well, it's something different. That after a long concert, it was exciting. But Manfred Eicher, who is the owner and producer for ECM Records, it was a new little company at that time, but he lives in Munich and he was there that night. And he knew Chick because Chick had already made a record or two for him. I didn't know him, but he came up and introduced himself and said, "You guys, you've got to make a whole record of this duet stuff. This is fantastic." And we said, "Oh, you're crazy. Who wants to listen to a whole hour of just piano and vibes?" Um, so he kept calling us and writing us for the rest of the summer the next year, saying, this would be great.
Uh-oh.
And we were in Europe, and he arranged for us to go to the studio and record. And we recorded Crystal Silence, our first duet record. And we still didn't think it was going to get much notice. ECM was a small, almost unknown label at that point, and the music was sort of esoteric. There was no bass and drums, and wasn't even, you could even argue whether it was jazz or classical or what. And we didn't think there would be much notice of it. Um, but then the record came out, and we immediately started getting calls. Our manager started getting calls, people wanting to book concerts, and we started doing them, and that went on for almost 45 years. And half a dozen records later, that was our duet legacy. But that's how we got started. And for some reason, we clicked instantly in the duet form that we found elusive in the band lineup. So for many years, we stayed away from having a band. We thought of adding instruments now and then. So well, why don't we, the next record, should we add some players? And finally, we were pressured by Pat Metheny, who uh, came to me and said, I'd really like to play with both of you guys, um, but you should be the one to propose it to Chick, or he'll say no. And so I did go to Chick and suggest it, and he was interested because he'd never played with Pat, and that kind of got him interested. interested. So we decided, well, let's pick, the most ideal bass and drummer that we can think of. So we all immediately said Roy Haynes on drums. And then it was a toss up between Dave Holland and Christian McBride as to who to choose for bass. So I asked Roy, what would he recommend since he would be having to play with whichever bass player, and he knew them both. But he said instantly said, no, Dave is probably the right guy for this project. So that's how we ended up actually playing with a band, me, Chick and I, just one time. We never played with an ensemble again after that.
Wow, pure luck. Why do you think those guys didn't want to do the jam session that led to you guys?
They were European. The Europeans musicians often have a very kind of uh, haughty is the English word attitude about doing things that they haven't prepared, or that wasn't I wasn't hired to do that. I was hired to play my songs and so on. Um, Playing jam sessions is an old-fashioned jazz thing to do. Okay, we're going to get up and play a blues. We all know a blues, or pick a standard. We'll do Autumn Leaves or something. These guys, they no longer did that sort of old-timey stuff. So the very word jam session was an immediate turnoff to them. Stick and I were not nearly so uh, personally strict about what we, were open to trying, and well, it was to our benefit. It turned out.
Oh yeah, what's to your benefit? That's great. Albert,
Hey, hi, can you hear me?
yes.
Yes,
Yes, hi, my name is Albert, and I have learned jazz vibraphone for 3 years, not that very long. I'm studying with Gustavo Acatillo. Yes, I would like to know because I would like to know more about the tunes that you play a lot is Shaker in vibraphone solo. So may I know more about how you develop this and your experience about that? Because I also know that your another recording many years after that you play with Chick Corea is quite different with the your solo recording. So may I know more about this?
yes. I learned that song while I was playing with Stan Getz because it's a Brazilian song by Joe Beam, and he had a hit record of playing bossa novas in the 64, 65, 66 when I was touring with Stan. And that was one of our regular tunes. And I really loved the song because it's got many sections to it. It's not just a simple, you know, uh, 24 bar tune or 12 bar tune or something. It actually is a more extended piece. And so it was more interesting to play. And so even after I left Stan, well, and I'll point to that when I was playing for Stan, I was the only chord instrument. I was essentially filling in for piano or guitar. So I was playing chords and harmonies and passing lines and so on, guidelines all the time behind his solos. And I learned during my years with Stan how to accompany myself playing with just bass and drums. I had to fill in enough harmony for it to sound complete, which meant a combination of both outlining the harmonies with my melody lines more clearly than I maybe would have had to do if I had an accompanist, and then also how to throw in voicings of chords as well to suggest a keyboard kind of style. So after I left Stan's band and started my own band, it seemed I'd already started playing some solo pieces. Even with Stan's band, he used to feature me playing one solo piece each set, and it was so he could go smoke a cigarette and then come back for the second half of our hour set. And I played almost always ballads. It was, My Funny Valentine or some such a piece, slow pieces that I could fill in the harmonies and sound pretty on the vibraphone. But I was pretty comfortable playing Chega, accompanying Stan, so it wasn't that big a leap to just going ahead and playing it as a solo piece. Um, and I can tell you that not every song adapts well to solo vibraphone. We do have a limited range, only 3 octaves, and if you think about it, it's the same exact range as a trumpet, just about. The trumpet goes 1 note lower and generally not any higher than the high F on the vibraphone. So as instruments go, it's a fairly tight, 3 octaves that you're having to work in. So, and the challenge of playing solo is that you not only have to make the harmony clear and keep the melody moving, but you also have to establish the time feel. So all 3 things you're responsible for as a solo player. You can't lighten up on any one of those 3 things, or it'll sound like something's missing. And that's the thing you don't want to have happen with the solo piece, is to make it sound like you need another instrument or two to help you out. It needs to sound complete. And those are the 3 elements that need to be there. So your attention goes back and forth between the melody line, the harmony, and keeping the time feel going. Turns out bossa nova pieces, straight 8 pieces, are easier than swing pieces to play solo, because you can play continuous, line patterns and comping underneath the melody, and even the melody lines kind of keep the running eighth notes going. So I found that Che Saudade was, you know, easier to actually play than it looks. Now I know if you look at somebody who's copied it out, transcribed it, and written it out, it looks like,
พี่
wow,
นิวเข้ามาได้
how do
ว่ะ
you?
ก็คือมึงจะไม่นอนแล้วฮะ
Uh,
นิวหาพี่ท็อปก่อนดิ
Hold on, Gary. Hold on, Gary. Somebody was talking. I tried to mute them, and I muted you. Oh, God. Here, I'm asking to unmute. Oh,
Now, okay, I'm unmuted
sorry.
now. It's okay. I forget where I was, but I was saying that because I had played the piece uh, with Stan for several years, it wasn't that big a leap for me to just do it on my own. And then it became kind of a signature piece. And I'll tell you a personal embarrassment I have about that song, and that it became so strongly connected with me. It's like my signature piece almost, and that's the first thing vibes players comment on or ask me about. Wow, Shake It or Dodge. But the actual recording of me playing it was from a live concert at Montreux Jazz Festival, and I played it way too fast. It feels like I'm on drugs or something, and I'm whizzing along through it. Because I had played it so much for several years, it was easy technically to do it. But when I hear it back, instead of being nice and flowing and relaxing, it sounds like I'm, on speed, and I can't listen to it myself. I feel embarrassed by it. And after I heard it, from then on, when I played it live, I slowed it down quite a bit. But there is a tendency, I'll end this conversation with this thing. If you play the same songs night after night on regular gigs, concerts, clubs, and so on, like I was doing, there's it up. And you'll notice this in Bill Evans' music, for instance. His earliest versions of his arrangements of some standards are kind of medium tempo. And then you hear a record of him from 10 years later, and he's flying through it. Now, to him, he's probably not aware that he's actually doubled the tempo. It just feels like, wants to keep energy going. And I noticed the same thing as some of Miles Davis records. Early versions, later on, they've sped up a lot. I think it happens naturally without you realizing it. And until you hear it on a record or see a video of your concert and realize, oh my gosh, what happened? I didn't never even realize that it had changed that much. But that's what happened with Chega. So I stopped playing it finally and switched to other songs for solo pieces. maybe 20 years ago. Um, but as I've come to accept, Sega will haunt me to my grave.
Well, well, you know what's funny? There's a video of you on YouTube playing Sunset Bell,
Mm,
and behind you is
is
Stan
Stan
Getz
and Steve smoking?
smoking cigarettes. And when you
Yeah,
first see, yeah,
that was in London in 1966. I found somebody sent me that video. Steve Swallow sent it to me, and it cracked me up. I was surprised. I mean, I was what was I 23 years old that year or something. Um, I was looking back on that many years ago. That's almost well, it's 60 years ago. Um, I'm I'm impressed by the facility that I had. I didn't realize I was playing as well as that back at that time. Sometimes when I hear my very earliest recordings, it sounds amateurish to me, and I say, well, I'm glad nobody's judging me by that record now. It's so long ago. But the other times I hear something from the early days, and I'm really impressed. Wow, God, it sounds great. It must have been a lucky night. So,
yep, that's
next
great.
question, I guess.
Charles,
Yeah, tired.
Hey,
Uh, what are you listening to? And maybe if you could tell us if you've been listening to any vibraphone music, whether in the jazz genre or otherwise, if you see any trends, or maybe there's some uncharted territory that needs to be moved into, in your opinion.
okay. Well, I listened primarily these days. I would say 90% of my listening is classical music, which was something I never had time for all the years I was touring and playing. And and so I've become obsessed with discovering new musicians, new works. I mean, there's endless spots. I won't live long enough to become an expert on classical music, but I'm discovering all kinds of music that's fresh and new to me. And when it comes to jazz and when it comes to vibes players, occasionally YouTube will throw up somebody playing vibes that I haven't don't recognize. Who's that? Somebody in Russia or Czechoslovakia or something, and I check it out, and uh, often it's somebody who's still in the learning phase. They're still learning, kind of learning how to play, maybe, doing all right, but nothing that I would want to go back and hear again. Occasionally, it's somebody that sounds very promising, and I'll send them an email if I can
hmm,
find their address and tell them I heard their piece and that I was impressed by it. In fact, there were two guys in Czechoslovakia, and I believe one must study with the other. To be honest, they both play very similarly, and they both play very similar stylistically to me, but very technically proficient on the instrument. So I was impressed enough to take a moment to send them an encouraging email. Um, as for players that I've actually acquainted with, there's Simon Mollier, there's um, uh, what, uh, the Slovenian guy. What's his name? Vid Jamnik, who I've known since he was 15 years old. And there's also a British guy now who now lives in Nashville. He moved about a year ago there. His name is Lewis Wright,
oh,
and who I think is least known to anyone else. And last time I heard from him, he said he was working more on drums these days than on vibes. And yet his facility and his musicianship and originality really impresses me. He's in his late 30s at this point.
he's great.
And he does have YouTubes with different groups that he's recorded with that you can find. Um, but I'm glad to see. I mean, 30 years ago, I guess, when uh, let's say I was 50, at that point, there should have been some new vice players coming along that were breaking new ground. If it was tenor sax players or piano players or other instruments, that would be the timetable. Um, once a leading player got in the 40s and 50s, there would be new people, coming up that would be, challenging and coming up with new styles, new abilities, uh, more challenging tunes, and so on. And I didn't seem to have find that happening when it got to be that time. I remember Steve Swallow even saying to me one time, "Where are all the Lives players? They're not showing up. They're overdue." And we talked about it a bit. I'm happy to say that eventually some of these new young players have materialized and are doing newer things. Stefan as well, Stefan Harris. I What I appreciate about his playing is that he did not fall into the Gary Burton category or the Milt Jackson category. It seemed that there were these two schools of playing that were based on those two players,
Mm.
and you either sort of were in that school, didn't necessarily exactly copy, but you would say, well, obviously a Gary Burton style player, or obviously a Milt Jackson style player. And now I'm happy to see that there are people finding new ways to do things, new paths, as is the way it's supposed to be. Um, the vibes is an interesting instrument in that it's not as widely dispersed as the other jazz instruments, the saxophone, the trumpet, the piano, the guitar, and so on. There's far fewer of us around, although more than there was when I was learning to play. You know, well, let's see, how old was I when I started? Six. That was like 76 years ago,
Hmm.
and there were you know there was Lionel Hampton, essentially, Red Norvo, and then
Mm.
Terry Gibbs soon after. But it was hard to find records of anybody that on vibes, and to see them play in person was even more difficult, particularly if you grew up in a farm town in Indiana, as I did.
Yeah.
Well, next question.
Okay,
Thank you.
hold on one second. It's let a few people in. Wait, hold on. And let's see if they have their sound off. I just didn't want
I have a
anybody to.
question.
Hold on.
I have a
No, no,
question.
raise your hand. You got to do the hand thing. Got to raise your hand. There's people in front of you. Um, okay, wait, let me mute. Okay. Uh, Janice Bombizo Veritas. Wow.
Hello, Gary. I'm Yanis from Latvia. I've been listening.
Latvia, wow. One of the few
Yeah,
countries I've never been to.
I'm living in Paris, but I come from Latvia. And
Ah.
been listening to your music since I'm 6 years old. I have a question about vibraphone technique and harmony. When you are playing a solo, you are playing with four melodies. You are not only using your two melodies, but you are also doing the camping. And I find that technically it's very challenging to do that, even if I know the scales, harmony, the chords. But technically, it's very challenging. What would be your advice how to work technically to do that, play a solo and do the camping in the
Mhm.
same time?
Okay. Do you play the piano?
Yes.
Well, that was my first thought, is that the reason I found it easy to play more parts than just one is because I do that on the
Okay.
piano. You have the right hand is playing a melody, the left hand is playing harmonies or a counter melody, and so on. So now most instruments have just one line. They only have their trumpet or a sax. They're just going to play the melody line, and that's all. So they don't have to learn how to control two things at the same time. But when you play keyboard instruments, you're keeping, multiple roles. One is, in fact, I described earlier that when you play solo vibes or solo piano for that matter, there's three things you have to keep sustained: the melody, the harmony, and the rhythm, the time feel. So, in a way, you've got three jobs that your brain has to divide up and do. And how it does it is, for me anyway, is it jumps back and forth between the three. I play a melody line and then I rest. And then I think chord, I comp. And meanwhile, in the background, that I'm hardly thinking about it at all, is keeping some kind of continuity going with, but either running eighth notes if it's straight eight, or comping if it's syncopated time. But my brain is jumping back and forth between those three things, and I can focus on the melody for 3 or 4 or 5 beats, let's say, and then it pauses, and then I think about the chords for a few seconds, and then meanwhile I'm thinking also about the time feel. I don't know of any shortcuts to doing this other than to try it first on slow pieces, when your mind has time to think and time to react. And then, in fact, that's how I started playing solo when I was in high school, and first realizing that I could actually play uh, something besides just the melody, or for no chords. I found that if I played a ballad, I could keep the melody going and play chords as well. And so at first I thought, well, I can do this on ballads, so that's a plus. But when I play faster tunes, I'll need a band to play with. But actually, as I got more skilled at it, I found I could play medium tempo tunes and keep everything going. And then eventually I could play fast tunes as well. But I started out playing slow, very slow pieces, uh, and so I could keep track of juggling both roles at the same time.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you.
Actually, do you mind if I ask a clarifying question
Of course.
to so my piano teacher explained to me that I didn't have to necessarily train each hand to be completely independent, and that to get there, I could orient the independence around when both hands were playing together. That I would take note in my music of, both hands have to get here, even though this is the melody and this is the chord. Would you say that uh, in reaching to achieve these goals of managing the melody and managing the chords and managing the time feel, that getting your body to do it involves recognizing when your hands are both acting together and when they have to separate, or is that not the mental model that you use to achieve these goals?
Okay, that doesn't happen in my mind
Hmm.
when I'm playing. Um, I will say that now that I've played for decades, um, I don't consciously think about the playing. Um, I just imagine the notes that I want to play, and my brain sends my hands and my mallets there, without me having to make decisions. The decisions are being made, internally by my unconscious mind, once I've mastered the playing. Same is true on piano. I'm sure the piano player doesn't really think about one hand or that hand or whatever. They're just imagining the sounds that they want to have occur, and the instructions go straight to the fingers, and it gets played. Uh, as to how to practice to achieve that state of mastery, um, I think to some extent, different people find their own thinking process. And I will say that I taught myself to play the piano, so that probably breaks all the rules in terms of what you're supposed to do when learning the piano. And I didn't start taking piano lessons until I was a senior in high school, and it was from a jazz guide who I wanted to show me jazz chords, because I could hear them on the records, but I didn't know what to call them or how to find them, or how to make a song sound like a jazz songs. So he taught me jazz harmony, and at the same time, uh, taught me better fingering, proper fingering on the piano. And then I was a piano major at Berkeley during the time I was there. So I was at my piano playing peak when I left school, and it's been downhill since then. Um, but that was because there was no vibraphone teacher at Berkeley when I was a student in 1960. The school was only about 100 students, and there was no vibraphone teacher. So they said, you can play the vibes as much as you want in the ensembles and so on, but you have to have a teacher for your major. And so they said, so you can choose either drums or piano, maybe. And so I ended up with piano. And it was great because it taught me a lot of new music that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise. And I studied with a classical piano teacher who introduced me to pieces by classical composers, which was all new territory for me. And it also led me to playing the vibraphone as a keyboard instrument as opposed to a two mallet style.
Cool.
Thank you
Um,
so much.
Augusto, wait, before you ask your question, did I hang out with you in Mexico? Ah, that's you. Okay, great. All right, sorry, go ahead.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to see you again, Maestro Tony, and it's a pleasure to be here sharing with you, Maestro Gary. Thank you very much for Argentina, and I live in Chiapas, Mexico, as Tony said. Um, so this is the land of the marimba, as they say here.
Mhm.
But I play vibes and piano, and I play jazz, and this is a beautiful opportunity for learning so much from somebody who changed the history of vibraphone, of jazz, and even I would, I think of music. And that's something I would like to ask to you, Maestro Gatti, because you have had the opportunity, as you said, of knowing and hanging and learning and listening these great souls of um, of earlier times as Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, and and you are this great soul for us, for this new generation. Like, wow, like living, living legend, like big soul of expression of music, and I think that's something we have to. I mean, we have the opportunity of listening to you, like really listening, because you're a big soul expressing. That's why you change life and music and the instrument. So I would like, and also you worked with Astor Piazzolla. So it was like, wow. Hmm. My question is, it's hard to make it simple, but I'll try. What's that you saw, or some things that you could see when you were around these people that were marvelous about their their way of seeing music or seeing life? What were in their spirits that maybe we as young musicians could, get inspired by? I don't know if it makes sense.
Okay, I think I know what you're asking about. And I will say that uh, the first reaction when I was talking to someone like Duke or Bill Evans or other Stan Getz, who I actually worked with, but even people that has met in passing over the years, Dizzy Gillespie and others. The first thing that I remember about them is that this is a giant who I've admired from a distance, and now I'm actually standing here looking at them. What am I how are they different somehow? Do they look different? Do they talk different? Are they suddenly saying amazing things or uh, acting, special in some way? Most of the time, the impression that they were very normal people, very kind, and also very interested. And this is a trait among jazz players in particular, maybe musicians in general, but jazz players especially. There is a natural instinct to reach out when you come across a young player who's has some talent. Your instinct as an older established player is to immediately want to encourage them, to be helpful, to make suggestions, anything I can do to help you. Can I introduce you to some people? Sort of thing. Uh, I had this happen so much with meeting major artists that they were always encouraging and open to you know talking about music, about just being friendly, just hanging out, and you get to know after a while that it's a big community of people who often know each other casually, but we all realize that we all have this love of the music, and we share this common thing that we all can do. So it's like maybe a convention of I don't know, carpenters. They're all experts on how to build cabinets and make furniture and stuff, and so they have endless things to talk about, and they respect each other because this is what they all do. It feels that way with when I'm around musicians, and when I was younger, it was them, you know, reaching out and helping me, and as I got older, it became the opposite. I became the one who became a teacher and a helper, um, and uh, so that's that's my memory of what this has been like.
Oh, it's great.
Okay.
Uh, um, uh, Julian. Julian is a student of mine. He has ears like you have, and
Uh-oh.
he's going to be a really great.
Have hearing aids. I don't know if I,
Yeah, I always talk to him about technique because I wish he would focus on it a little more. So it will hopefully around his question, you can talk about technique and maybe get him in line. Julian.
yeah. What's your question, Julian? Before I give you some advice that you probably don't need, go ahead.
Hi, it's an honor to speak with you and meet you, and I love your playing.
Thank you.
So I would just like to know what would be like your advice on aspiring young vibraphonists in like the evolving world of jazz.
Okay. Um, that's a good question. Vibraphone players um, have both a challenge and an advantage. Some advantages, plural, and some challenges, plural, I guess I should say. For starters, our instrument is easier to learn to play than almost any other instrument. In fact, I can't think of anything that's easier to learn than the vibraphone. It's always in tune. It was tuned at the factory, as they say. And the tone is the same, whether I hit it with the stick or you take the same stick and hit it yourself, it still sounds the same. So imagine what a clarinetist or a violinist goes through for the first 2 or 3 years of playing their instrument. They still haven't got a decent sound. They're still squeaking and squawking and fumbling, trying to play in tune and so on. It takes years to master uh, wind instruments, especially, and string instruments. But the vibes is fairly easy. Even the piano is more complicated because your fingers get tangled up. So you have to learn fingering systems in order to play it with fluency. Vibes is easier. Um, that is also the musical challenge for vibes, which is it's a mechanical thing. It just lays there. These are bars of metal, or marimba, it's bars of wood, and they all sound the same. On an instrument, on a horn, every note is a little different. The piano is also a machine. Well, even more than the vibes, you push buttons and it makes a sound come out of the box. I mean, that's about as mechanical as you can get. So the challenge for piano and for vibes is to make it expressive, to use dynamics and variations in attack and so on to make it sound, as we say, more vocal. The the natural, basic human sound that we measure all music by is the human voice. Horns are closest to it. We are far away from it. So is piano. So pianists learn how to shade using volume, using sliding from one note to another, grace notes and so on to suggest what a horn can do. And we do the same thing on the vibraphone. Now, so musically, that's the challenge for vibraphone players. Business wise, it's another world. The disadvantage to being a vibraphone player is that no band needs a vibraphone. And so most vibraphonists have to lead their own band. That's how you get gigs for the most part. Not many bands are looking for a vibraphone player. If you get good enough, bands will actually make an exception and hire you. They'll say, "Wow, well, I'm not looking for a vibraphone player, but this guy plays better than any of the horn players I know in town." And so, even though I have to help him carry the damn thing from the truck and set it up, it's worth the trouble because he plays so well that it's worth giving it a chance. And I was that vibraphone player when I was growing up. I had to make my own jobs by being putting the band together. I would find the place to rehearse. I would drive the van to get us there, and so on. And every vibe player who's been around for a while will tell you, yes, that's exactly how it's done. Um, there is, on the other hand, a small advantage to the fact that we are not a familiar instrument. We don't have nearly as much competition. You may be the only vice player in your town, or one of two, for instance. Um, and for instance, for me, I got discovered pretty early. I got my first record contract when I was 17 with a major label and was a band leader by the time I was 24. If I had been, let's say, a piano player, instead of getting recognized and showing up in the downbeat polls and so on as in my late teens, I would have been another young piano player like Chick and Keith and Herbie and McCoy. And, you go down the list and there would be 24 names that would come up before mine that I'm competing with. And maybe if I'm lucky, by the time I'm 30, I would have risen in visibility enough to, be considered an important player, or even be lucky enough to have my own band someday. But that happened to me, you know, in my teens, because almost no one else was playing the vibes at that time. Mike Maneri, he'll tell you the same thing. He was playing with Buddy Rich the same time I was start playing in New York with George Shearing and then with Getz. That he was the only other vice player I knew my age who was actually had a gig, a steady band of some kind. I'm sure there were other vibes players out there, and could think of a few. Dave Pike was another one I remember about my age, but uh, it it wasn't nearly as competitive as to be a player of the saxophone or other instruments. So it's a challenge to be a vibes player, and yet there are some advantages as well. So that's
Great,
my answer, Julian.
great answer.
Thank you.
Mhm. Gary.
Hi, Gary. There you go.
Hi
Hi.
everyone. Hi. Is everything all right?
Yeah.
Yes, we hear
Okay.
you.
Hello? Okay. 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 Hello everybody. My name is Gary. Okay. I want to say something before I ask questions. I want to thank you first, Mr. Gary Burton. Yeah, I'm your crazy fan, and you're my hero. So you can say my English name is Gary too. Okay, I come from China,
Ah,
and okay, I want to say I heard your records and saw your videos. Um, maybe a lot of and each one hundreds of times. I love them, and I want to thank you.
sure.
Um, helped me through those dark times and days. I want to thank you. Your music is so beautiful. I love it. I
Thank
love
you.
them. Okay, okay. And I played a lot of your transcriptions and transcribed a lot of them. Okay, and I played the jazz vibraphone and made 2 years now.
Hmm.
And you use your maths. Yeah.
Ah,
Okay. I want to thank you. Okay. And my first question is I want to know what should I do to start writing my own songs. What
mhm.
should I do first? Mm, maybe melody or rhythm or harmonic or experience. I don't know. I want to write something, but I can't do that now.
Okay, that's a good question. And people do ask me that sometimes. Um, am I still on it? Suddenly I'm not hearing myself as much.
Oh, you're on.
Okay. Um, it depends on the song. Sometimes the melody is what gets you started, and you build on that. Maybe just a few, four or five notes that are make a little theme. And you say, okay, now how can I repeat that and make variations on it and build it into something, make it longer, do more with it. And other times it might be a harmony progression, three chords that really sound cool in together that I heard maybe in some other song. And then I start with those few chords and see if I can add to them and build on that. And then other times I'm thinking of a type of song. I want a ballad, or I need a something exciting and energetic, so a faster tune, or it's straight eight or something. Um, in many cases, when I've written songs, I actually have a need for a certain type of song. I'm making a record and I'm looking at the eight tunes we've got already, and I realize I need another ballad. So, and the session is day after tomorrow. So I've put my mind onto slow, pretty. I start playing chords, a little harmony, minor, major, uh, and then try to get something started and then continue it, develop it. Um, there's there's no special trick to it. Some people do their composing all in their mind first, almost the complete tune is there. They picture it, and then they sit down and can almost just play it and write it down as fast as they can write. Chick, that was his approach often. Other people do it very slowly and steadily. They make it up as they make up a bar or two, and then they do a few more, and so on. Um, one suggestion I remember a composer told me is if you're in the middle of a song and you're not finished, don't stop at the end of the 8 bar phrase where it feels like this section is now complete. Stop in the middle somewhere so that when you come back to it, uh, you won't be at a stopping point. You'll be in the middle of something and you can pick it up and continue on and get the same uh, uh, flow going. I thought that was a helpful idea. But overall, Gary, my suggestion is just keep trying. Maybe say to yourself, do you know what the 12 bar blues is? Or you're turn your mic back on.
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right. Then your challenge is I'm going to write a blues. I'm going to start with the basic four, one, four, five chord changes, and I'm going to write a simple melody, and then try changing the harmonies a little bit, make it a blues that's a little different than the blues everybody else plays. I love coming across blues. After all, there's a million of them out there. And I love finding a blues set of changes that I've never seen before. That's not overly complicated, but actually works wonderfully well. There's a Duke Ellington blues called African Flower, Fleurette Africaine, that has one change that's different than a normal minor blues, and it suddenly made the whole piece feel original. And there's a Bill Evans minor blues called Las Vegas Tango, which only has two chords instead of three. I said, how can you make the blues even simpler? It only has E minor and A minor, and it goes back and forth between the two. But you notice it's a 12-bar form with it goes through the same feel of blues changes, but he made it special by even simplifying it even more. So your first assignment, Gary, is to write yourself a blues song.
There you go.
And you
Okay,
and you
thank you.
might you,
Thank you,
you
my
also
hero.
yeah, thank you. And you might also try writing a new melody to some other song, even not a blues. But take this, a lot of jazz players did this. They would take a standard tune and then write a new melody on it, call it a Scrapple from the Apple. A lot of Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie bebop songs were based on old standard chord changes. But they just write new melodies to go on them. That'd be a way to get started too. Good luck.
Yes, contrafact, right?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, my hero. Can I ask another questions?
Go right ahead.
A little. Okay. Um, when will you come to China to for performance? You know.
Well, I don't perform anymore. I stopped 8 years ago because I started having memory problems. When you get older, sometimes that your memory stops working for you for moments at a time. In fact, we have a name for that in English. We call them senior moments. Well, this began to happen to me when I was in my mid 70s, early 70s. And I noticed it happened more and more in the middle of concerts. And I would forget where I was in the song. I would even forget what song we were playing. And I'd have to pause and listen to the other instruments. And then suddenly it would come back. Oh, yes, that's what we have been. Now I don't know where we are, and scramble to catch up and so on. So I knew that it was time to step back, and I didn't want to keep trying to play and having my playing, deteriorate, which uh, would have, I think, would have been what would happen in the future. I have been to China one time on a vacation about 15 years ago, to Shanghai and Beijing. I had a wonderful time, enjoyed it very much. Would love to go back someday, but it wouldn't be to play. I did play in Hong Kong twice, come to think of it. It wasn't China yet in those days. It was still British.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you,
next
my
question.
heroes. Okay.
Okay. Sitan.
Hi, Gary. Hi,
I,
Tony. Hi, everyone. Uh, I'm too excited, but I'm going straight for a question.
okay.
Uh, we vibraphonists don't that don't be that famous in the world, right? Um, in your career, my question is: in your career, uh, there are there any rock band or pop artists that asking you for playing for them?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I've been asked to be a guest performer on probably 10 pop records, um, of different kind of country records and rock records and so on. I've done two records with the bass player from what's the name of this band? God, I can't think of their tune. I'll think of it later. Here's my memory going. Um, I did most of a whole album with this singer. God, now names are my biggest problem. Um, and I'm on a record with Eric Clapton. I'm on a record with who else can I think of here? Um, the names are I'm sorry, I'm not I have trouble with names. I used to even began to have trouble remembering the names of the guys in my band.
Mhm.
The last couple of years that I was touring, I would have to introduce the band some nights with no problem, and then there would be a night when I would look over at them and I say, I know them, they're my best friends. I've played with them for 5 years now, and I can't think of the drummer's name. Uh, and finally, I have to ask the bass player, tell me, give me a hint here, and so on. But that's what happens when you get older. But I have, yes, and I've always been surprised when I get a call from a band, a rock musician wanting to have me play with them, and I say, well, what prompted you to think of me, and what prompted you to think of the vibraphone? And they said, well, I could just picture the vibraphone sound. And then I asked somebody, well, who's the most important vibraphone player? And they said, some guy named Gary Burton. Said, oh, okay. Well, how do I contact him? They didn't know me at all, but uh, called me and asked me to come and be on one song, and that's always, except for the singer, and I've got the gold record hanging on my wall. What was her name? It was 25 years ago. She was famous country singer and then became a popular star as
Oh,
well from Canada.
Be
not Katie.
Katie Lang.
Yeah.
Katie Lang. Yes, there we go. She actually knew my music, had several of my records, and we met at one of her concerts. And then she called me about a year later saying, I'm making this record, and I could really imagine you playing on it. So I went out for 3 days and we recorded. uh I added her, it was mostly all recorded, but I added vibraphone parts on most of the songs on the record, and it was a lot of fun. She's a wonderful singer.
Yeah. You got time for one more?
Sure.
Okay, last one. Ernie.
Yes, hello. What a privilege to
Whoop.
playing by yourself. Something that I really appreciate about you is that you would you would assume that it's a given, but your timing is always perfect. Sometimes somebody big, especially playing with four mallets and Facebook, uh, will play this great song, and I feel like I never have done this, but I feel like playing in the comments. Wonderful, wonderful song. But did you think of using a metronome? So it's
Well, I didn't have a perfect time when I was first starting out. In fact, most people don't. Some people do. I've come across some beginner musicians, early students and they just seem to have very steady time right away. But for the most part, people aren't born with that steady time. You develop it over time by playing with a metronome, which I practiced with, and I highly recommend practicing with a metronome. Also, recording yourself. I used to make. I grew up in a little farm town, so I didn't have anyone else to play with. But I would record on my reel-to-reel tape recorder, piano comping, and then I would play along with it. But in order to keep the piano comping steady, I always had a metronome going too, so I would stay in an accurate time. And then I noticed in my vice playing that I would get ahead or behind. I would rush. If I got excited, I would speed up. Um, so I realized that my time wasn't naturally steady. And so I paid more attention to it. And I also tried doing something else that I saw drummers do. Got a pair of brushes, like the drummers play, with the brushes. and I didn't have a drum, but I could sit down put a record cover on my lap and just play time put a record on and just play the brush strokes with the record and see how perfectly exactly steady and without making any glitches or losing the beat at all, if I could get through the whole track without making a mistake. That taught me a lot about what steady time feels like. And I'm teaching my brain to uh, remember this. And the other thing I'll say that was an advantage for me was that I did most of my practicing in a band.
Uh-huh.
Once I left Berkeley, where I was a student, and I moved to New York, I got my first job with George Shearing's band. We were on the road 312 days that year.
Wow.
We played almost every night. And the same thing happened with Stan Getz, who had a hit record at the time. So we were playing 6 and 7 nights a week, most of the time. And the vibes were never available. They were always on the truck or at the club or being transported to the next concert or something. So my my building of my technique was actually from playing in the band night after night after night. And I had, of course, a drummer playing the time for me, so helping me get used to steady time. And the only time I practiced was when I had to learn new music, and that would be whenever there would be, a record project coming up, and and then I would have to spend a few days working on new tunes. I did usually learn new music on the piano first because I could sit down. It was since it took more time to uh, to learn a new song than just to play it one time. You had to spend an hour or so on it. So um, I usually learned new music on the piano and then moved it over to the vibes when I was ready to perform it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, but
Right.
just very, very briefly, my training is I play percussion as well, but not the drums. So I've,
Aha,
I've I've learned how to listen to the timing because sometimes you have the conductor with one time, the drummer with another one, and I
yes.
don't add a third one.
Well, that's I heard your stories a lot about the rapport between the conductor and the timpanist. Um, I've who was it? Vic Firth, and he was the timpanist in Boston for decades till he retired, and he was well known as one of the great timpanists for orchestras. And the conductors that came through the Boston Symphony in those years always, said, they can depend on him to keep the time and the tempo where it belongs. So I know there's something about the role of the percussionist in the orchestra is often underappreciated.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
Sir.
Okay.
Well, Tony,
Yes. Yes. That was
been
plenty. Thank you.
sure. We'll do it again sometime.
Yes, and if any of you guys want to get more information when we do these, we do them at the beginning of each month. Go to tonymaselli.com and there's a form on the right-hand side. You just sign up and we'll do it. But I can't thank you enough. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Uh, Welcome. Goodbye, everybody.
Yes. Thank you, Gary. Talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.